History of Hispanic oppression in America. Hispanics are the fastest growing population in America, but how is their oppression manifest in American culture, and particularly in the American education system today? Let's talk about some of the misunderstandings regarding Hispanic immigrants in America today. One myth is that the only Hispanic immigrants to America are Mexican, but actually the number of immigrants from Mexico barely outnumbered the amount of immigrants from other Latin American countries in 2016. Many are facing extreme poverty, crime, and gang violence, among other things, in their home countries. Instability in many Latin American countries has contributed to the rising amount of immigrants, especially due to natural disasters and political unrest. Hispanics believe in the American dream. They come to America with the hopes of a better life for themselves and for their families. In fact, Hispanics are more likely to believe in the American dream than most other Americans are. The modern American conservative movement to build a wall on the border between the United States and Mexico has contributed to the division between dominant groups in America and Hispanic immigrants. Rafi Letzter wrote in Business Insider discussing the potential psychological effects of the border wall on both Americans and immigrants. There's a mental block that makes it difficult to account for the full humanity of people on the other side of the giant slab, or even to recognize that you should try. This mentality promotes internalized oppression and internalized dominance, even if unintentional. This divided ideology is harmful both in society and in an educational setting. Children of immigrants often enter school with negative labels. They don't know English or aren't ready for school. They may have cognitive or social skills that schools undervalue or don't recognize. Their academic and social skills may decline with schooling as they perceive the low expectations of their teachers and peers. This is evidence of both internalized dominance from educators and of internalized oppression by students lowering their own expectations of themselves. The local context of reception, whether welcoming, hostile, or neutral toward immigrants, may have a particularly strong effect on the level and types of discrimination children face in schools and in society. Negative context of reception may result in low mobility rates for many children of immigrants across ethnic and lingual lines. Clearly, a lack of faith and a belief in the capabilities of young students, particularly students who belong to minority groups, can be damaging and problematic in the school system. This poor reception of Hispanic students is by no means a new phenomenon, as is evident in the story of Sylvia Mendez. Sylvia Mendez was one of many Hispanic students who was forced to attend a lesser quality segregated school in the early 1940s because of her complexion and Hispanic last name. Her parents fought back with the hope of ensuring equal education for all students, regardless of race. This led to a federal appeals court decision in 1946 that desegregated schools in California. This court decision led to other families in different states successfully challenging school segregation, and eventually, nearly a whole decade later, in 1954, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled school segregation based on race unconstitutional in the famous case Brown v. Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. However, this did not solve problems for Latino children in the public education system. The Supreme Court didn't decide until 1973 in the case Keys v. School District No. 1, Denver, Colorado, that Latinos had the same right to attend integrated schools as blacks, 19 years after Brown v. Board of Education was first decided. It is important to remember that oppression is both institutional and ideological. Just because the institution, government, changes a law does not mean that society's ideology immediately follows suit. Nowadays, school segregation is not gone, particularly not for Hispanic students. Today, the average Latino student attends a school that's nearly 57% Latino, more segregated than Black or Asian students. The default for white and Asians is middle class, and the default for Blacks and Latinos is impoverished schools, said Gary Orfield, a UCLA professor of education, law, political science, and urban planning. School segregation means that these students have poorer facilities, materials, and even teachers. Segregated schools are also significantly less likely than more affluent schools to offer AP or honors level courses. Additional findings on expulsion rates, dropout rates, success in college, test scores, and graduation rates underscore the negative impact of segregation. Student discipline is harsher, and the expulsion rate is much higher in minority segregated schools than those that are wealthier and whiter. Dropout rates are also significantly higher in segregated and impoverished schools. Nearly all of the 2,000 U.S. schools considered dropout factories are doubly segregated by race and poverty. And research indicates that students who graduate are less likely to be successful in college even after controlling for test scores. Segregation, in short, has a strong and lasting impact. Another important aspect of Hispanic oppression is Hispanic students as English language learners. Hispanic students learning English make up nearly 80% of all English language learners in many states. Many Americans stereotypically believe that English language learners do not want to or are incapable of learning English proficiently. However, our current education systems require English oral and literacy skills in order to succeed. Further, when programs are developed to help both American and Hispanic students, many perceive that unfair aid is being given to students of foreign origin. In English-dominant schools, administration and staff are not in agreement as to the success of the program. Staff in those schools see the Spanish-English dual language program as a hindrance rather than a positive due to the English-dominant population struggling with acceptance and with student buy-in. Though we know from research that dual language classrooms are actually incredibly beneficial to children, perceptions are that English language learners whose native language is Spanish are incapable of the same level of language learning as American children. Even after decades of affirmative action, which is policy designed specifically to aid minority groups in regards to education and employment opportunities, Black and Hispanic students are more underrepresented at the nation's top colleges and universities than they were 35 years ago. According to the New York Times, affirmative action increases the number of Black and Hispanic students at many colleges and universities. However, the reason is that certain groups remain underrepresented is because of equity issues that begin earlier. As discussed earlier, elementary and secondary schools with large number of Black and Hispanic students are less likely to have experienced teachers, advanced courses, high-quality instructional materials, and adequate facilities. This disadvantage from the beginning of minority children's educational career can set them up for a lack of opportunity later on in life. In summary, oppression of Hispanics continues to be widespread, as shown by continuous school segregation and lack of effective affirmative action and legislation to aid struggling. The stereotypes contribute to the hindrance of success for members of this group, and misconceptions about the capabilities of Latinos in terms of language learning and academic success make mobility particularly difficult. In essence, Hispanic immigrants are at a disadvantage in the American educational system purely because they are susceptible to discrimination and unequal opportunity due to their race.